This episode of the Cult Popture podcast was brought to you by our Patreon. If you want to tell us which films we should watch or get 2 extra exclusive podcasts a month, then please consider joining the cult and donating at www.patreon.com/cultpopture. So, you know how, you know how the whole he's been diagnosed with ligma. What's ligma? Ligma balls thing.
Yeah, I'm well aware of it.
The Sugma thing, or the Secondes River, and stuff like that. The D's nuts
the
stitch
stigma.
up. Yeah, the stigma I guess.
Stick my dick in your butt.
So I thought of another one.
Okay.
It requires no interaction from you. It's a one-sided one.
Okay. Just like this podcast, am I right?
Yeah. So, okay, next time you have to pee, announce to the room, I gotta go pee. Penis. Penis dick. It's like she's saying, pee in this dick. That's why it's called a penis, I'm convinced. Anyway, that's how I'm easing potential new listeners into our show.
Nice.
We don't always talk about.
You did a good job. Welcome, new listeners that heard about AJ's penis joke and decided to check out the podcast.
Yeah, this is going to get posted to Reddit, and the headline will be like, New Zealand podcast opens with funniest penis joke I've ever heard.
So, what is this podcast other than penis jokes? I mean, what is life other than a series of penis jokes?
That's such a good question, Richard. This is the Cult Popture podcast, and you are joining us for film franchise Fortnights, where every fortnight we watch and discuss a sometimes randomly selected, sometimes purposefully selected, sometimes selected by other people film franchise. Forgot what the what the noun I was getting to was, you know, when you start that far back. So we watch and discuss film franchises on this show. We've been going for over 3 years. And today, Richard, what you tell them. I know how much you love telling them.
Thank you.
So what
today,
the title of the episode is.
We've watched, and now we're now going to discuss the 4 films in the Grumpy Gus franchise.
I think you mean the Furious Frank franchise.
No, I actually meant Mad Max.
I watched all of Furious Frank.
You watched all of Filthy Frank's videos?
Yeah, I thought the Filthy Frank was our franchise.
Yeah, Mad Max. It's an Australian franchise from Australia.
Mm-hmm.
Every film was directed by George Miller, except one's got a little,
caveat.
A caveat to that. But we'll get to that. So yeah, this consists of Mad Max in 1979, Mad Max 2, aka The Road Warrior, aka Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior. That came out in 1982, and then we had Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome in 1985, and then we have Mad Max Fury Road in 2015. So, spans a long time, this franchise.
And this is our second franchise that we've covered on the show to be solely directed by George Miller, and time to bust out the best George Miller fact. He also directed Happy Feet and Happy Feet 2.
Yeah.
That's the best George Miller fact. And Babe Pig in the City, but not Babe. He did not direct Babe, just Babe Pig in the City.
Yeah, so we'll have a lot of... there'll be a few George Miller facts in this. I'm not going to lie to you.
My favourite category of fact.
So
I always, whenever I'm at my pub quiz, I always put double on George Miller facts.
All right, so what is Mad Max 1979 about?
All right, so the first Mad Max film stars a very young and very Australian Mel Gibson in his breakout role? Was this even his breakout role, or was it not his
he was
breakout?
actually still in drama school.
There you go.
Apparently, he got paid $10,000 for it.
Wow. And it's set in what the synopsis on the back of the DVD tells you is a post-apocalypse, but nothing in the film really indicates that. It just kind of seems like it's set in
Well, I wouldn't
outback.
say post-apocalyptic. It's dystopian more than post-apocalyptic.
Yeah.
And yeah, the film, the opening sort of crawl at the start of not crawl, but the opening sort of titles explain that it's a few years from now.
Yes. And Max Rockatansky is a cop, and in like this desert area in Australia, and this is such a complicated movie to try and describe. It's basically there's a evil gang of like ruffians who cause heaps of havoc, led by one ruffian named Toe Cutter, and Max struggles to police this area and to look after, to serve and protect, when he knows that sooner or later he will become just as bad as these crazy criminals. And in the end, his wife and child are killed by them, and he does in fact go a little mad, because Richard, we all go a little mad sometimes. That's from this movie.
So what did you think?
What movie is that from?
Psycho.
Yes, it is.
Just moved away from the mic.
You moved away from the mic to breathe in.
Yeah. Well, just to say so it's like,
chocolate rain flashbacks, dude.
Tay Zunde famously turned down appearing on this podcast.
I think we could have convinced him, but his like timidness made me think he probably wouldn't create the best content for our podcast.
This is not a joke. We reached out to Tay Zunde to ask if he wanted to be on the podcast, and he just said, "Oh, I'm not really like a movie guy, so
yeah." And we're not especially Tay Zunde fans. He just had his DMs open on Twitter. That was the only reason why. No, he was following us on Twitter for some reason. That's weird. I forgot that Tay Zunde follows us on Twitter.
Anyway, so yeah, what did you think of it?
The first Mad Max.
Mad Max.
So this is one of those films that people constantly, when they talk about it, it's more like they refer to its legacy than as a movie itself, right? Because Mad Max was like huge for Australian film. It's like, it's, in the ranks of like Al Mariachi and I don't know, bad taste for movies that are like these now well-known directors, or even just like indie films that were made against the odds, turned out really well on very, very little budget. I feel like people always talk about that, when they're talking about
it's like the first kind of movie that put Australia on the map as a place where films can be made.
Yeah, and to put that into perspective, New Zealand's version of that was Goodbye Pork Pie. So very different styles and genres and qualities of movies. I won't tell you which one I like more. But in terms of looking at Mad Max 1 in the like grand scheme of all four of them, and I had seen all four of them once each before.
Interesting.
I'm not crazy about Mad Max 1.
Interesting.
I think it has some interesting ideas, but I think ultimately it's very strange and hard to follow in some parts. And I think that everything you think of when you think of Mad Max is introduced in the sequels. It's not really the first one.
Yeah, sure.
That's what it's famous for.
Yeah, the movies kind of slowly get more dystopian and post-apocalyptic with each film.
It feels like...
It's a cool, it's the deterioration of society. Because this one, this could just be in the outback,
And that's probably the coolest thing about Mad Max 1, is that the place in which... It's the time in which this gradual apocalypse is like... It's less like government has fallen down, and it's more like government is about to fall down, and it's struggling.
And it's actually kind of for budgetary reasons. So there's lots of great behind the scenes stories for this, because obviously when you get to something like Fury Road, you've got a huge budget. You can go out to the middle of nowhere and then and do all this, but they just couldn't afford to pay extras and stuff like that, or make the buildings look too derelict or anything like that. So they kind of just
derelict my balls.
Thank you.
All right.
Like they kind of just had to make do with what they had, and like George Miller's car features in the film. A lot of the extras were apparently just paid with beer, and I think Mel Gibson got paid like $10,000 for it, so it was like super shoestring budget. George Miller partially financed it with the money he made working as a doctor.
Oh, wow.
Because he's the medical doctor. He was working in an emergency room, and he kind of got the idea for the film apparently by seeing all these motorcycle injuries that people would come in with.
The strangest thing about Mad Max, the first Mad Max, and something that it feels strange to know exists in the same universe as something like Mad Max Fury Road, is in one of the shots in Mad Max 1, there's very clearly like a BP in the background, like the petrol station, and it's so strange to just see like this, logo for a company that's still around, and what they're really trying to make you feel like is the end of the world.
Yeah.
It's very odd. But yeah, I'd say that the craziest thing about Mad Max as a franchise, and I'll say this at the first one because maybe it can be something we, weave in throughout as the running theme of this episode, is that they feel less like sequels and more like George Miller gradually being able to make a little bit more of the movie he always wanted to make with each sequel.
I fully feel that, yeah.
It's because the first one is like, it's not really quite post-apocalyptic. Then the second one is like, well, it is post-apocalyptic, but I'm not really getting a sense of the world. And then the third one, the budget skyrockets and you've got these worlds and these cultures. And then the fourth one, it's everything the third one had, but now it looks amazing and, it looks way better. And there's even more world building and more culture and more stunts and post-apocalyptica kind of like worked into it. So that's what Mad Max is. It's not a series of chronological films. It's the same film made better, arguably, each time 4 times.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I'm glad you brought up as well. So you've seen the movies each once before this.
I watched them in exactly the same circumstance before Fury Road came out. We were like, "Oh, we got to go see Fury Road." But
we've got to do a podcast about this.
we hadn't seen the other.
My Patreons had voted, and
yeah. No, and so we watched them all over a week or so leading up to Fury Road. And Mad Max 1 is one of those movies that you watch it for the first time and you're like, this is what Mad Max is about? And then it's the sequels, as I said, that kind of
introduce the things you associate with it. Yeah, so it's interesting. I hadn't seen any of the first 3, but I've seen Fury Road like maybe half a dozen times, including like as recently as like a month ago I watched it. But so I've got a couple of tattoos, and when I was getting my first one, which is a little stonecutters symbol on my hip, not to be confused with the toe cutter. But while I was at the tattoo parlor, so because me and my sister got matching tattoos, and so I had to like wait for our appointment and then wait for my sister to get her one done, and then while I was getting mine done, and on a little screen next to the like table that you lie on, the little bed thing, they had a TV that had a DVD of Mad Max in it, and it played the opening, like the title screen over and over again, and so it's like a maybe a minute long loop of some of the highlights of the film, and that shot of one of the bikers getting run over, and it cuts to this close up of this guy that can pop his eyes out.
Yeah. Very strange part of the movie.
Yeah, and if you've seen the film, you know what I'm talking about. But this guy, like,
it's essentially like it's supposed to be like a real life ogre. But the way they do it is they zoom into a known character's face before he gets hit by a truck, and then quickly cut to someone with their eyes. It happens a couple times in the movie, actually. Their eyes bulging out of their socket, like they're so surprised.
Because there are people that can actually like do that, like bulge their eyes out of the sockets.
It's a choice. It's a creative choice.
It's a different choice. But that was one distinctive part of it. And so this minute-long loop, I saw maybe on repeat for close to 2 hours.
Oh, dude! Everyone has a DVD menu on repeat story. Eh? Like, that's a universal experience that is ripe for stand up. Somebody needs to do a stand up joke about watching a DVD menu on repeat.
That's so funny. So then I borrowed from a friend. I think he lent me the first one because I was like, oh, kind of keen to watch this. Then I borrowed it for like 2 months and just never watched it. And that was my experience with Mad Max.
Nice. I also have an experience with the eye bulge scene. It's not quite as, maybe I'll cut this out if it's not as interesting as, because your one was interesting. I feel like my one's not interesting.
Oh, thank you very much.
I remember when I was a teenager, someone talking about eyes bulging out of their sockets and someone being like, oh, that happens to Toe Cutter in Mad Max. And I was like, what do you mean? And then another one of my friends was like, oh yeah, it's this weird like subliminal message kind of flash of these eyes bulging out. And as soon as he said subliminal message, I was like, I have to see this.
I have to.
Because as if you had listened to our spooky urban legends podcast from Halloween, you'll know that I fucking loved that shit as a teenager.
So before we move on to Mad Max 2, just interestingly, this held the record for the most profitable film ever made at the time.
Wow, nice. Do you like it?
Yeah. I like. It's one of those things where watching it again, like I had the similar kind of like, oh, this is Mad Max, but I guess because I'd seen that highlight reel for so many times, I did probably have quite a reasonable expectation of what it was about.
Right. The 1 minute loop gave you a
yeah. So I was like, oh yeah, I kind of got the aesthetic of it and everything like that. And so I think I liked it, but in the same, like you said, the same way, like something like El Mariachi, where you're seeing a director with a lot more to tell, and just like I love that low budget filmmaking where working out those kind of things. And there's actually a great interview. Robert Rodriguez, who directed El Mariachi, has a TV series called The Director's Chair, where he interviews other directors. And so there's like great episodes with John Carpenter and Quentin Tarantino. But I watched the George Miller one, and it's really interesting, like him telling all these stories about because a lot of the bikers in the film were like actually bikers, and they all got given this letter that was essentially to explain to cops, like, I'm in a movie, I need all these weapons, like, and so that's kind of referenced in the film as the like get out jail free card. That's like an inside joke. And they talk about Mad Max, and there's a weird thing they talk about as well, how the film was dubbed in America when it was first released, because they thought people wouldn't understand the Australian accents. So they dubbed it with American accents, and they play both versions of, like, it's one of the Toe Cutter's first scenes, where he's like, oh, they call him the Knight Rider. And it's this real, like, it's such a great, like, performance. And then you see the American version, it's like, they call him the Knight Rider. And it's like, it's just not at all. Yeah. So that's really interesting. And it's weird how they're like, oh, people won't go see an Australian movie if they sound Australian. But it's like, that's why you go see it.
And it adds to the kind of otherworldly nature of it.
Yeah, exactly.
I would say that if you are into the story of film, and if you're into seeing low-budget beginner projects of people who would become greats, watch this film. But if you aren't that kind of person, I would say skip this one. I watched it with a couple of friends who had only seen Fury Road, and they did not join me for the other two, because this one was just so... There's a part where Max and his wife go on holiday, and they go to just this camp out, and it's like, this is just a normal movie. This isn't set in the end of the world. There's nothing. They're just on holiday. You see him swing on a rope swing and jump into a river, and it's like, it feels so slow in parts. But I think one of the most fascinating things about this movie is, like, where else can you remember Mel Gibson not having an American accent?
Yeah.
What is his story? It feels like we're watching a different Mel Gibson, because my image of Mel Gibson is just he's American. He's got an American accent in interviews. He just is American. So did he go to LA or wherever and then just lose his accent and then
Probably.
never got it back? It's so odd.
I mean, maybe.
Mm.
So, Mad Max 2, aka The Road Warrior. So yeah, sometimes you'll see it just called The Road Warrior, like a First Blood kind of situation.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it's Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, or just Mad Max, The Road Warrior. But officially, I think it's just Mad Max 2.
Okay.
So yeah, there was a lot of pressure for them to make a sequel. And he started working on other films. In fact, he actually got an offer to direct First Blood. But essentially, you're right. He thought, fuck it, like, we can do what we did on the first one, but we can probably do it better now.
Yeah. No, I like this film. What did Mad Max 1 have on Rotten Tomatoes? You didn't tell me.
Oh, yeah, 90%.
90%? So this one will be like 95, right?
It is 95.
Yeah. This one, I feel like this is a dorm room poster movie, like this is the one that really left its mark on the world. So this one, it is technically a sequel because it's his wife and kid are dead and he's kind of like rattled by that, but we're deep into the apocalypse now where there's no the only societies left are crumbling attempts at tribes in the middle of the desert, and there's villains and stuff, and it essentially revolves around Max. Max agrees to help this. It's almost Seven Samurai-ish.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's Seven Samurai. He agrees to help a village who are being tormented by a bunch of evil bikers by helping them take a truck full of gasoline, which is what they call gasoline, away from where they are to where they want to be living. And it's very simple but very cool. And I think that I really love how much this movie is like a proto Fury Road. Like Thunderdome isn't as much like Fury Road as Road Warrior is, Road Warrior has like proto versions of the people on the pole vaults on cars and people stuck to the fronts of cars and stuff like that. It's very cool to see how the stuff would extrapolate and evolve and mutate over decades in George Miller's mind to be his, the masterpiece that is Fury Road later down the track.
Yeah, which we'll get to. We don't want to spoil our feelings for Fury Road. Yeah, it is funny. It's very Kurosawa, and I think his George Miller cited Kurosawa as a massive influence. But yeah, it is very much like the Man with No Name trilogy, but like out back instead of out west.
Totally.
Yeah, because it's like which one is it? The first one and the Man with No Name trilogy, Fistful of Dollars. It's quite similar to that as well.
Yeah.
What do you think of like the character of Max? Because he's an interesting hero, don't you think? Like because sometimes he's this, in the third one he ends up becoming this like messiah, and then sometimes he's like a drifter who's like doing it for himself, and then sometimes he's just kind of there, and then he gets called out in this film for his self-pity. But yeah, like he's got an interesting kind of arc over all four films, really.
Yeah, I'd say the character, the like, what you can expect from seeing Max as a character is that he wants to be a lone wolf, but he's got this heart of gold and always ends up doing the right thing, which I think is great because that's a great little. That's how we would all like to think of ourselves, I think, And so he's like he wants the world to swallow him up in this new post-apocalyptic society to grizzle him down and make him like numb, but he's too good. He's too good of a person to be able to give up his humanity. And I think that's really special. Yeah,
because you know what? Like when we're in a post-apocalyptic time, all we have is our humanity.
All we have is our humanity. Exactly, Richard. Exactly.
Yeah, so because this one's the one that was very clearly the favorite one until Fury Road may have taken that title away from it. We'll find out when we get to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like, I guess let's talk about Mad Max 3 as well, and then we can kind of talk about why maybe 3 doesn't quite live up to 2.
Okay.
So yeah, what is Mad Max 3 about?
So Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. I thought it was
Yeah.
Beyond the Thunderdome until a Facebook comment on our Facebook page this week. It was like, it's Beyond Thunderdome. And I was like, what? Somebody call Mandela. It is...
He died in prison in the 90s.
The 90s, yeah. Beyond Thunderdome is like he winds up discovering a little underground town called Bartertown, which is run by Tina Turner, and she's got having like a turf war with the guy who runs the what are they? They like fuel the power of Bartertown or something like that. And he's a little person strapped to the back of a very large, oaf kind of character. And they're called Master Blaster because he's Master and the other guy's Blaster. And so Tina Turner's character, whose name is Auntie something, Auntie...
Yeah.
No, it's a entity, Auntie Entity or something like that.
Yeah, that's it.
She gets Max to agree to challenge Master Blaster to a battle in the Thunderdome, which is where they, their court, where they decide.
And like Thunderdome is one of those things that's now
more famous than the movie itself.
Yeah. Like the idea of it's just a common term for that kind of thing.
Yeah,
like a battle arena.
Yeah, and so he agrees because he's going to get his vehicle back, which was stolen, and he agrees and goes to fight Blaster in the Thunderdome, and he's kind of losing, and then he's kind of winning, and just as he gets the upper hand, he discovers that Blaster is Down syndrome and refuses to kill him because obviously that's part of his set of morals, and because that like disrupts the law of Thunderdome, which is 2 man enter, 1 man comes out. He gets banished, and he gets banished into the middle of the desert where he's picked up by a tribe of lost children who are the descendants of a crashed aeroplane. It's very complicated, but this movie isn't just
the descendants of the plane. The half plane.
Yeah, the plane made love with the sand, and now these sand planes are like everywhere. And they basically say, "Hey, we want to go to the better, there's a better place out there for us, and we want to find it." And Max reluctantly agrees to help them, but they end up having to go back to Bartertown to get supplies. Is that what they're doing? And then it's them like running away from the bad guys to try and escape to the better town, and they succeed, but Max sacrifices his chance to go to delay the bad guys, after which the bad guys are like, "See you around," and leave him alone, and then he walks off into the desert by himself.
Yep, off to further adventures.
Yeah, this one feels more like a video game almost than a movie.
There's a lot of like back and forth and side quest type stuff. But so this is the one that I mentioned at the start. There's a caveat to being directed by George Miller. It's directed by George Miller and George Ogilvy's. Hope I'm saying that right.
Yeah.
But because Byron Kennedy, who was like George Miller's partner or creative partner, and he produced the first 2, he died in a helicopter crash in 1983, and so Miller got his friend to sort of just help lighten the load so that he could he was still grieving.
Nice. Interesting. What did you think of this one?
It's cool. Like it has some of the like kind of like silliness or like camp elements a little bit, like with like Tina Turner's character and stuff like that, and the fact that Tina Turner's in the film.
It's the most dated of the Mad Maxes because of how Hollywood it is. It's got it. Not only does it have Tina Turner, but it has a Tina Turner tie-in song that plays, and it's like, okay, this is kind of making it feel like this movie is stuck completely in the 80s. And this has 85 on Rotten Tomatoes. Is that correct?
80.
So this for a long time is considered the lesser of the worst of the 3. I prefer it to the first one. It's just just easily more entertaining than the first one.
Yeah, sure. And just like the production value going up and things like
It's
that is
awesome.
like,
Bartertown looks incredible. And like,
and the Thunderdome, the way that's all done.
yeah, and the fashion sense of the post-apocalypse society, right, is like you get a hint in the first one that everyone's very into like, you know, fluorescent face paint and feathers and kind of almost like a metrosexual kind of look, right? And that increases in the second one, but in this one it's at like it's the best it's been yet, right? Because like everyone is so extreme in what they're wearing, and I love there's a character who's like one of the henchmen of Auntie Entity, and she's like he's like a slightly shorter guy, but he's got like a pole stuck to his back with a mannequin head on top of the pole, and it's like that is so cool, and I love how much that says about the traditions and rituals and you know like the type of just I guess the fashion and culture of this new society. I think is really awesome, and so that's really cool, and I like a lot of where this movie goes, but it does feel kind of aimless in parts. But it's still great. I would say that the most confusing thing about this is that there's a character in Mad Max 2 he's a gyrocopter, so like a little makeshift helicopter pilot. And in Mad Max 2, he's credited as like gyrocopter pilot, like that's the character's name. And then in Mad Max 3, the actor returns to play a different character named Jebediah, who's also a helicopter pilot. And it's like, what the fuck? Like at the very least, make him be unrecognizable to the character he played in the second one.
Like they do in Fury Road.
Yeah, they do that in Fury Road. But no, he's such a similar character in every way, but you can tell with how he interacts with Max that he's clearly never met him before, and they're not supposed to be the same character. And it's so what did they not have any other actor who could fly a helicopter?
Yeah, it is weird. Like the films kind of do feel like almost like anthology films in some ways.
Oh, they are so different from each other because it's tempting, and we delve into this every time there's a franchise that is kind of that kind of highlights this, that in a big broad sense the purpose of our podcast is to kind of figure out how a franchise can be built, right, and how it works. And part of me is tempted to be like, well, Mad Max is a franchise which kind of get better as they go along. But you can't learn it. The only thing you can learn of how to replicate Mad Max's success in its sequels is to make your sequels so incomparably different to each other and essentially the same thing but with slightly different twists.
Yeah, it's funny because you say they're incomparable, but at the same time we were just talking before about how they
that's a good point.
It's essentially the same film over and over again but trying to but with more money.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's a better way of putting it then, is that it's there's nothing you can learn from how to make a good sequel from the Mad Max series.
So your ranking of the first three would go 2, 3, 1, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll probably be the same, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, what do you think? Yeah, what do you think nudges 2 in over 3?
I think it's just the whole it's the simpler idea. It's the type of film that Mad Max is, that Mad Max 2 is the quintessential version of that type of film. This is the post-apocalyptic lone wolf movie that all post-apocalyptic lone wolf movies are copying,
Yeah. Whereas and I like the I mean, this isn't a knock to Beyond Thunderdome necessarily, but the Mad Max franchise as a whole has this amazing approach to world building.
Oh, it's the best world building in fiction, as far as I know. It's so good.
I think that Road Warrior, other than Fury Road, Road Warrior, kind of does it the best. There's a lot more to take. Beyond Thunderdome probably gives you the most to take in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so it can be a bit overwhelming.
The Society of Lost Children have their own version of English that's slightly grammatically incorrect, but I love that though, right? Because it's this is how after 30 years of being in a desert that language would change, Like they talk about the I'm gonna have to find. You keep talking. I'll find a quote from.
Yeah, and how they like one of them's pregnant.
Yeah.
And it's like, they just worked it out. It's funny, like, if you like, do you reckon you'd work out sex?
I think it is intrinsically human to work out sex.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like,
I mean, I've grown up in a society understanding what it is and still haven't worked it out, but other people probably will.
It'd be such an interesting, like, it's one of those unethical experiments that, like,
which we
just
love
raising,
huh? Which one of those unethical experiences which we love.
Those experiments where, like, to just like raise a group of children, like, obviously have some kind of overseer, but like just sort of let them figure it out on their own, like Lord of the Flies style, and just see what they would work out and like the language they would develop and from scratch and everything like that. Because maybe like you should do that, like put a group of like 100 babies, let them all raise themselves together, and when they develop a language, the entire world should use that as the universal language because that's the one that humans created from scratch.
My friend, you just created Mad Max 5. Here is a quote. This is a full monologue. I'll read a bit of it. That just gives you a if you've never seen Beyond Thunderdome, this is what the lost children talk like. So this is from Savannah Nix, who's like the leader of the pack. She says, "This the years travel fast and time after time I done the tell. But this ain't one body's tell. It's the tell of us all, and you've got to listen to and member, cause what you hears today, you got to tell the newborn tomorrow. Eyes looking behind us now into history back. I see those of us who got the luck and started the haul for home, and I members how it led us here, and how we was heartful, cause we seen what there once was." That's so well written. You know what I mean? That's what language will sound like in 200 years. I love the history back. Go now into history back.
Essentially, if you were to like guess filmmakers that would cite specifically Beyond Thunderdome as an influence, what filmmakers come to mind?
I want to say Taika Waititi, right? Was Thunderdome an influence for Ragnarok? I feel like I've heard that somewhere, or at least it seems like it would be, having seen Thunderdome and Ragnarok.
No, our good friend Chris Weitz.
What? Yeah, Chris.
So Chris Weitz, we've interviewed on this podcast. He directed About a Boy, American Pie. He wrote Rogue One, a Star Wars story, or an early version of it.
Mm-hmm.
But he's cited this as an influence. There was some event a few years ago that was like, meet Chris Weitz. He's going to be doing a panel, and also doing signings of his book because he wrote a book, like a young adult fiction. And then afterwards, it was like, and stay for a screening of Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. And I was like, why this film? Well, this is written by Chris Weitz about the film.
Yeah.
George Miller and George Ogilvy's Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome serves as the high watermark and possibly the shark jumping platform of the remarkably inventive Australian road warrior cycle. I saw it as a teen and was intrigued by the sketches of an end times economy and anthropology, and confused by the ascendancy of the noticeably American Tina Turner in the Australian wasteland. Not the least in terms of inspiration for my book was the little tribe of semi-feral kids who speak their own argot and keep their own counsel while still retaining an essential innocence and hope. For all its mayhem and bloodshed, the Road Warrior movies are full of touches of humanity and humour, elements that further influence The Young World, that's his book. And its production design, the flashes of swag in a guard's feathery mohawk headgear, the cowhide cowling of a jerry-rigged vehicle, the geodesic gladiatorial arena of the film's title is tremendously compelling. The last element influenced one of the subcultures of Burning Man, which in turn is a big source of inspiration for my own post-apocalyptic kids.
God, he's so fucking eloquent, man. That's such a well-written recommendation for a film like Beyond Thunderdome. And yeah, I mean, what he's talking about is world building. And I feel like Mad Max is, not to steal his words directly, is the high watermark of world building, at least in film.
Yeah, and I also think it's the shark jumping platform.
That's great. I love that. So the world building is so intense in Beyond Thunderdome. and I feel like it's more intense in Beyond Beyond Thunderdome than it is in The Road Warrior, but that's kind of why The Road Warrior is a better film. Is because it's almost less concerned with world building and more about like the cool stunts and shit that it can get away with.
Yeah. All right. Now, not to race through the podcast, but boy, do I want to talk about Mad Max Fury Road.
Let's do it, man, because we're at the end of the decade, and this movie is showing up at number 1 on loads of best movie of the decades lists, right? Like, yeah. I read an article. Did you see that article by AV Club that was posted today? That's like
I saw an article. Yeah,
yeah. It's like how Mad Max Fury Road became the best movie of the decade, and it's
because that's because they had an internal like ballot.
Yeah,
and The Master was number 2, which they did like a midway through the decade. What's the best so far? The Master won that, and then a month later, Fury Road came out.
Yeah, a month later, Fury Road came out, and and it's not just AV Club. Like they listed a bunch of other places that are all putting Fury Road as number 1. And I'd love to maybe before we go into what it's about and like what it's rated, I'd love to discuss briefly, Richard, why it's weird that Mad Max Fury Road would almost be like unanimously agreed upon as like a movie like Mad Max Fury Road would be agreed upon as the best movie of the decade.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you have any thoughts, or shall I just rattle off things that I've thought of?
Yeah, no, I agree. Especially if And at December 31st, 2009, you were like, the best film of the next decade is going to be Mad Max Fury Road. Like, who the fuck would believe you?
No, the best film of the next decade will be Mad Max 4. Like it's a sequel to a long dormant intellectual property. It's like, where's the skin of a mindless action film?
In my defense, I think the title Fury Road was out in 2009. So
okay, fair enough. And it's like critics don't like sequels. They don't like, mindless action films. And yet this film, it's got so much beneath its surface. And in a weird way, the stuff it has beneath its surface are like social commentaries on things that hadn't happened yet. Like there's a lot of Trumpian kind of stuff in Immortan Joe, the film's villain. It is essentially a movie about the Me Too movement and women liberating themselves from the bondages of being like kept by predatory men before the Me Too movement, It is insane how relevant this movie
it's
was.
Crazy that a filmmaker thought that women were people before the Me Too movement.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. But it's so ahead of its time, and yet somehow that didn't mean it was overlooked at the time. And I remember when this movie came out feeling that this was the biggest movie since The Dark Knight, which is what I'd probably say is the best movie of the 2000s.
Interesting.
And so I watched this movie about 2 hours ago, so I'm fresh. And this article just did such a great job of saying it on the AV Club, just how it's like it is insane that this movie was as good as it was, but also insane that this movie got made. That that somehow George Miller was able to make like a seemingly completely uncompromised vision to a property that he had no proof anybody still cared about, and then was able to put such loud messages in the film about what he's trying to say.
Yeah, and like 30 years after the last film.
So crazy, man. Yeah. It's a little sad because it almost feels like we're not going to get a movie that is as unexpectedly amazing as this for a long time.
Yeah, for sure. What do you think of it?
I don't really like it. I love this movie. It's so fucking good. And if you haven't seen it, don't think you won't enjoy it. There's actually something in there for everyone.
Yeah, that's the thing, eh? They're like, I showed this film to my sister, I've showed this film to my dad, and they both
loved it, and that's the entirety of demographics.
No, but it is like, both of them afterwards were like, it's not really my kind of movie, but it was real good. Like, Even if, because it's so meticulously and perfectly crafted, you still have to appreciate it on some level, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what is it about?
So it is Mel Gibson stepped down, and now a Tom Hardy with a dubious at best Australian accent enters the series as now Mad Max, or Max Rocketobolsky. And
I was taking a sip of water, so I couldn't create Rocketansky.
So it's what the most interesting thing about Mad Max Fury Road is that it's not really a movie about Mad Max. He's kind of like a sideline player to a story about a Charlize Theron's Imperator Furiosa who lives as like a truck driver in the post-apocalyptic society run by Immortan Joe, who is this old, decrepit creep of a man with a mask over his face because the bottom of his face is like ripped off and he's covered in sores and blisters.
Yeah, he's played by Hugh Keays-Byrne, who also played the toe cutter in the first film.
Yeah, and he keeps like supermodel women in his like
literal
harem.
supermodels. It's like Rosie
exactly.
Huntington-Whiteley.
Yeah. It's Zoe Kravitz, isn't it?
Yeah.
I didn't remember she was in the film, probably because I didn't know who Zoe Kravitz was when this movie came out. And so, he rules over the society and, like, refers to the woman that he keeps hostage as his property, and they're his breeders, and the kind of minions that do his bidding are called war boys, who are all very skinny dudes, shaved head, covered in white body paint, and he's kind of fed them this lie of a religion. It's all fucking world building. It's so fucking good. He's given them this idea that to die is glory, and before
to die in battle.
To die in battle is glory, which is very Greek, and whenever you see various ones of them die, they like pull out a spray can and spray their mouth with chrome spray paint and say, "Witness me," before dying in a blaze of glory, so that people can witness their glory, and that kind of thing. And so the story kind of kicks off when Furiosa smuggles the woman that Immortan Joe is holding hostage out of the city or the citadel, it technically is, in one of these trucks, and they soon catch on and chase after her, and Mad Max is kind of pulled in for the ride after, in a completely separate storyline at the start, the war boys catch him, and the main war boy, whose name is Nux, played by Nicholas Hoult, in a like career best performance. He's so fucking good in this movie. He like refers to him as his blood bag, and it straps an IV to him and Max, and then straps Max to the front of his car so that he can keep getting blood, which is such a cool fucking idea. And what I love, this sounds like bad storytelling, but I love how little Max has to do for so much of the film. He's just dragged along, doesn't want to be there, doesn't want to help, which is good storytelling because it actually informs his character when he does escape the clutches of Nux and then helps, at first tries to steal their truck, but then eventually helps these emancipated women find their freedom and escape the bad guys.
But famously the movie is essentially it's a journey to the green place, and then when they find out that it's not what they expected, they just make a big U-turn.
Yeah,
the entire movie is a U-turn.
But that is good. That is thematically what should happen, though, because it's about not running away and instead seizing the means of production. Essentially, right? It's like seizing power back from those who subjugated you, right?
So a little bit about the production of this film, just because it's interesting. So this was it's been in production for a long time. It was supposed to shoot in 2001, but was delayed because of 9/11.
Wow.
Wow. And so George Miller just had to. Apparently, he only had a small window of time that he could make the first Happy Feet in, so he had to abandon this for a bit and do that.
I have to make Happy Feet, which, if you remember on our Happy Feet episode, the way he came up with Happy Feet was someone was like, "Oi, what about Mad Max but set in the snow?" And instead of the obvious way to take that idea, which would be to make a dystopian Mad Max movie set in the snow, he was like, "Yes, Yes, and it's about penguins and they dance.
And then so he made the decision not to bring back Mel Gibson, because Mel Gibson wasn't exactly hot property in the early to mid 2000s. And also he didn't want the character of Max to be like an older kind of grizzled hero. Like he wanted him to always be this like contemporary hero, essentially. Yeah. So at one point Heath Ledger was considered, but then he passed away, obviously.
He would have been so good.
Yeah, because he's Australian as well.
Yeah.
Wow. And then at one point as well, it was reported that he was going to be making a 3D animated R-rated movie, which was going to essentially use the plot of the unmade fourth Mad Max film.
Yeah, that just sounds like we can't get the budget. Sorry, we're going to animate it.
Yeah. But then eventually it came about and it somehow got made. The cinematographer came out of retirement to shoot it.
Oh fuck! And it looks so good as well.
Oh my god, it's gorgeous. So this is like a movie that it's made by a bunch of just old men. They're all like in their 70s. Like the fact
and it's so fucking woke.
Yeah,
it's being made by people who you would think would be the least woke of all. Well, I mean Hollywood, maybe not, but in general.
Yeah, but yeah, it's like George Miller was like in his mid to late 70s making this, and it's
how old is he now? You keep going. I'll look it up.
I've got it like right here. He is currently. He was born in 1940. He's 74 now. Oh, so he was 70-ish when he made it. Yeah. Mad Max Fury Road. What do we have to say about it? It did very well. It's got 97% on Rotten Tomatoes. It was nominated for 10 Academy Awards, which was I think it was tied for the most with The Revenant at the Academy Awards.
Remember when it even came out that it was even nominated? Remember how wild that was? This isn't the type of movie you would typically think would be nominated for Best Picture.
But so it was nominated for Best Picture and Director, but it and cinematography, I believe, as well. But it won 6 Academy Awards: editing, production design, costume design, makeup and hairstyling, and both sound mixing and sound editing.
It should win all of those, but then also it should also win Best Picture and Best Director
and Best Cinematography.
Yeah.
This film, man, it's it is weird to. It's weird to have a movie come out that almost immediately is put into the zeitgeist as being one of the all-time greats. Like, in a specific genre, like, the type of movie it is, it's the best one of all time. And just as a movie, it's one of the best ones of, in the last 10 years.
Probably last 20 years.
Yeah.
Like, this
sure.
is 30 years.
I described it because we had a chat about this film on our Discord, and I'll do a little plug for our Discord now.
Yes, please join the Cult Popture Discord, where you can have conversations so embarrassing that we'll read them aloud on the podcast.
Yeah. So because we talked about like, we're covering Mad Max, and we're quite excited to talk about it.
There'll be a link to the Discord in the show notes, by the way, in case you don't know how to find it. Because there'll be the URL is like complicated.
Yeah, because I have no idea how to join Discords. I just I got invited to our one. But anyway, it's great fun, and we chat about the podcast, and then there's also like, we can talk off topic, and yes, we have like spoiler chats for when there's a big release as well.
Yeah.
So. Well, one of our someone on our Discord. I'll keep them anonymous just in case they don't want to be identified. So, but I mean, if you're fine with it, Mac, let us know, and we'll put your name in.
Mad Mac.
So, we were talking about Fury Road. A lot of people were like, "Yeah, it's amazing." And then he was like, "I was so confused by Fury Road," and we were like, "Oh, okay, go on." And so he said it had literally no character development in it. The action and effects were really cool, but that doesn't make a good movie.
Yeah, that's not necessarily an incorrect diagnosis of a film in general.
Okay, so he then went on to say, so I'll just say the whole thing, and then we can break it down. So he said, maybe I think low of it because I didn't really like it. I was confused the entire time. Like, was the movie a reboot? If so, then who was the little girl at the start? And if it isn't, it is really Mad Max 4 or 5 or whatever, then why did everyone call it a reboot? And why isn't Max the main character in a movie that has his name in the title? And now here we go. This is my favorite. One of the worst takes I've ever heard of a film.
I hope our fans, the few precious fans we have, appreciate being roasted.
Because at the end of this, I said, dude, I think you need to watch the film again. So he says, I felt bad for Immortan Joe as well. He said the bad guy. He built the entire civilization after the apocalypse. Sure. He kidnapped some people, but he had running water in a desert and was willing to share it. And then everyone wanted him dead. So at the start of the film, Immortan Joe controls the Citadel, and we see he lives like reasonably lavishly compared to the people down below. And he turns the water on. It's an event that everyone gathers for. He turns the water on. There's a little bit of a waterfall, and people are like running after it, picking up muddy water off the ground. And he turns it off and says, "Do not get addicted to water." Like that's the kind of thing that good people say.
Yeah.
And then at the end as well, when now Furiosa has control of the Citadel, she releases the water. And then he went on to say, and I said, like, he rapes and kidnaps women and forces them to breed. And he's like, well, I don't think that happened. And I'm like, he has breeders who escape his clutches, and very clearly there's several points where like this comes up. It's one of the major themes of the film. And he was like, oh yeah, no, he is a bad guy. And then he goes on to say...
That's such an understatement. He's like one of the great villains of modern cinema. Like, he's so good. He is despicable.
Then at the end, and then he goes on to say... Because I pointed out that he's not sharing the water. He's kind of like flexing how much water he has that he's willing to throw it away to the people that are so far below him. And he says, yeah, but at the end they just dump all the water onto the poor people. That's kind of dumb. Like, sure, they have more water now. And I was like, what? Like, they're not giving all the water. Like, they've got some kind of a well. And then he says, well, if they had a well, then why are they going to the bad guy for the water? And it's because they anyway.
So join our Discord where you can have conversations that are not private.
But then he goes on to be confused as to say, well, like once they've dumped all the water on the poor people, then what? They've just wasted all their water, and the implication is that they have now a supply of water, and now they're willing to share it with the people. But yeah, that was it was very good. Good laugh. And then I ended with the conversation ended with, I think you really need to watch the movie again before you continue commenting on it.
Yeah.
But one interesting point that he kind of brought up is about the whole reboot thing. What do you consider the chronology of this film?
It's hard because part of me wants to crown this movie, as the best distant sequel, the best Lego sequel, whatever you want to call it, or at least put it up there with Blade Runner 2049 and American Reunion as the best, and Creed. I haven't seen Creed, but you vouch for Creed.
Yeah.
As the best, sequels to long dormant IPs, but it really does directly not contradict but rewrite stuff we've seen, because it's like he mentioned that Max is haunted by like the ghost of this little girl throughout the whole movie, she's not his kid from the first film, because his kid was a baby boy, and it's certainly not his wife because it's a child, and so you're left kind of like assuming that because this movie's very much made so that you don't have to see the previous three films. And so it tells you just enough to know that Max has demons in his past, and that he at one point let someone die who he deeply cared about. And I guess at a stretch you could say that this happened in between Thunderdome and Fury Road. Like, this is a separate person who was important to him who died. But yeah, it does kind of feel more, and just because the recasting of the character as well, it does kind of feel more like a soft reboot than a sequel. However, you could say that about every Mad Max sequel. So maybe this is the perfect sequel because it honors the tradition of essentially being a soft reboot the whole time.
Yeah, and I've got no qualms with Max not being the main character, essentially.
Oh no, not at all. It's, as I said before, it kind of actually plays into it better because it builds into his story arc. And also, he said that there's no character development. Like Nux literally goes from a religious zealot suicide bomber to someone who saves the day in the end. When the everyone's escaping, he stays in the truck and crashes it to block the path for the bad guys who are behind them. And before he does it, he looks at the woman who he's kind of had a thing with since the middle of the film, and he says, "Witness me." And it's like, fuck, man. Remember when we did the episode on what's the best line of dialogue? Did we talk about Mad Max Fury Road at all?
I can't remember if we did or not.
Because a lot of, there's a couple of, basically all of Nux's lines or all of the War Boys kind of catchphrases are great lines. There's, "What a lovely day" is a great, it's more the delivery than the line itself is great. Because he's like, "What a lovely day," as he drives into a storm. And then there's things like, what is it? "We'll carry you into Valhalla, shiny and chrome." Or something like that.
Just mediocre.
Yeah. These are great. But "Witness me" being like what they yell before they die, and then just the context of how Nux uses it before he dies, that it's no longer about the glory or getting to go to Valhalla, but it's about look at, see how much I love you and see what I'm doing for you. It's fucking beautiful, man. I got chills watching it this time. It's so well delivered, and it's such an essential piece of what makes this movie great, is that final "Witness me."
Yeah, it's like, because one thing I will say about this film is it's so perfectly crafted on every level that even if you think, oh, the story's a bit weak or whatever, but I wouldn't say it's weak, it's just simple.
It's nothing special, the story.
But it's
no, actually, no, it is. No, the linear narrative is pretty simple, but all the stuff like the themes of feminism and overthrowing corrupt shit is that's the story. That's part of the story. Yeah. And that's all great.
Yeah, exactly. But so something like Chinatown is considered the greatest script of all time, right?
Yeah.
And then I think this is to almost every aspect of filmmaking other than writing what Chinatown is to writing.
Agreed. Actually agreed. Yeah.
It's one of the, it's fucking beautiful to look at, and that's not just the cinematography. A lot of that's the grade as well.
Oh, this movie pops.
Yeah,
this movie looks like a frog you should stay away from in the jungle because it's brightly colored.
And it's also just the direction. I mean, all of this kind of falls under directing, how the amount of praise we're giving it. But one thing I love about this as well is the editing of it. It's such a, I think there's a video essay or something I read about it, but watch this movie, and especially in the action sequences, something really interesting that it does is because it's such a kinetic movie, the entire this massive periods of time where so much is going on, but you're never lost, you're never trying to figure out what you're looking at, and the film does this really cool thing where it guides your eye line perfectly, but from shot to shot. So even though there might be 30, 40 cuts in under a minute, it perfectly. So the focal point of one shot will be in the bottom left corner, and then they'll move to the bottom right corner, and then it'll cut, and then something darts from the bottom right corner to the top left, and so you're constantly following between the cuts. So there's never a time when the film cuts and you have to take a second to take it all in to know what to look at. But every single frame of this film could be put on a wall as a piece of art.
Yeah, man. It's like Godzilla King of the Monsters, but actually not a fucking stupid movie, and people need to stop saying it's good because it's not good. Yeah, man. No, I agree. And as if we can return to the topic of world building, which I also think this is the Chinatown of world building, right? there is, but I saw this movie. I'd seen this movie once before watching it for the podcast again. Shockingly, despite how much I love it, and it was at the movies, at the Pictures, in 2015, and between then and now, other than like what the plot is about and kind of like the general you picture when you think of the movie, the main shot I remembered. And I know you know what I'm going to say, is when they're driving through the swamp at night. They drive through a swamp area at night, and it's this wide shot of the truck driving in the distance, but in the foreground are silhouettes of humans walking on all fours, but they've got stilts. So they're like stilt walking on all fours through the swamp. And that is the single best example of world building I've ever seen in my life. You know what I mean? Because it tells you that this is a swamp where there is a human faction in the swamp, and they have learnt to live here by walking on stilts. And if that's possible, what else is possible? How else are people living in this apocalyptic Australia? The mind boggles at the possibilities of what else there could be if this. And it's so creepy, it's so spooky, but it makes you, without a single line of dialogue, you understand like an inferred history of the world and this culture specifically. And I that's the Instagram shot, that because we take photos for our Instagram at Cult Popture on Instagram of every movie we watch, and that's the one I took of Mad Max Fury Road as the people on stilts watching the truck. It's so good, man.
Yeah. Everything about this film, man. Yeah, it is a weird film to be crowned as King of the Decade, but it like.
But that's kind of why, right?
Yeah.
Like against all odds, yeah.
And
you know what? It's kind of appropriate that as we come to the end of the decade, Richard, we watch the best of the decade film in our film franchise podcast. I mean, it's not the last one. We've still got 2 left, which are definitely not the best of the decade. but yeah, there you go.
All right.
Hey,
Richard.
Before we move on to the segments that we usually do to close out the show, why wouldn't it be cool, friend, to look at what our fans and listeners and commenters, what they consider to be the best scenes in Mad Max? Because we posted a photo and said, hey, what's your favourite scene in the Mad Max franchise, to Facebook and Instagram, and a couple of people replied, exclusively talking about Fury Road, but that's fine. So, over on Facebook, Ryan Walker says, love that movie. I like when the music kicks in during the motorbike and chase scene through the canyon. Any scene with cool things happening and a kick-ass soundtrack. The final chase is great too, and when Max is jumping between vehicles and you get to see the creative pole casts and anchor cars. Yeah, man, that final car chase fight scene thing. And like the part where because there's people on like pole vaults on their cars that are like swinging back and forth to attack, and like Max ends up on one, and there's that one shot where he's like stuck on it as it's like doing its arch from one side of the screen to the other, and you just see him like sort of gaze out very briefly at the at the chaos unfolding. It's very funny.
That's a funny thing as well, because that was done practically, like these people with like counterweights, and that was I might have talked about in the Happy Feet episode, but that while he was working on Happy Feet 2, people like went out into the middle of the desert and like tested these things practically, and like sent him little cell phone footage of it to just, and so he's in the middle of post production on Happy Feet 2 and just getting like, oh yeah, that's right, I'm doing Fury Road after this.
Yeah, no, totally, and wasn't that one of the reasons why it took so long for the movie to come out as well?
Yeah, it's like all these like
Adam says the fight between Furiosa and Max when he stops the war rig to get some water, which is great when they're like before they're friends, right? And she doesn't know if she can trust him. It's this awesome little kinetic fight scene where she's like trying to shoot him, but he's connected to a car door and holds that up as a shield. Yeah, that's very fun.
And because it's interesting as well that we didn't mention it, but like Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron like hated each other on this film.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and like quite famously, and I think they both sort of hated the experience of working on it. And Tom Hardy's like since said essentially like because this film was kind of almost written without a script. It was mostly written with storyboards. And you have no idea if this film's going to be good.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah,
and
true.
I think, just you're following around this 70-year-old madman who has this, this vision, but it's so hard to get that when you're there. And you're in the middle of the desert, you would have just been like, oh, fuck's sake. But then you watch the film, you're like, holy shit.
Dante also just says "witness me," which we've talked about ad nauseum, but yes, is one of the best scenes. Over on Instagram, Carl L52 says the car chase in Fury Road, to be more specific, probably the fight between Furiosa, Max, and Nux, which is what Adam said as well. Visceral and desperate, with great use of their surroundings and shot in a clear way so that audiences can follow the action easily. This movie is so fucking good, dude. I'm just reliving it with people's descriptions of these scenes. They're so great. And Mad Max fan page, who I'm going to guess probably isn't a fan of Cult Popture and found the post some other way, said, it's difficult to choose because there is a lot of good scenes, but I think it's the scene where we discover the Doof Warrior and the Immortan Joe's army. I think the Doof Warrior is the guy playing guitar on the... Yeah. It's the most epic scene for me. The music, the customized cars, the shots, and this fucking Doof Warrior. The Doof Warrior is so indulgent, isn't it? It's what can we do to stop making stuff awesome by accident and just have something that's just straight up like, yeah, we know you're gonna fucking love this.
A guy with a flaming guitar attached to bungee cords. But I love how the score's kind of like diegetic as well. For a lot of the chase, that you've got actually people like pounding the drums and playing the guitar.
And the first, I think the first teaser trailer for this is one of my favorite teaser trailers of all time, which is
blew everyone's fucking socks off.
It's like I haven't watched it in a while, but I remember it being like classical, like huge classical swelling music that's kind of like with the action cut to the beat of it. I can't quite remember it. Something like that.
Yeah, because it was like there was the Comic-Con trailer was like the first reveal of it, and that was like when people were like, "Oh, we don't want a fucking Mad Max movie without Mel Gibson," and then this trailer came out, and everyone was like, "Holy fucking shit!"
I want to hear what the most naive preview of this movie was by like a respectable source. Like, who doubted what is now like being unanimously crowned as the greatest movie of the last 10 years? Who was like, this will never work. Why are they making it? They're just reheating old ideas. It's not like anybody's going to remember this. Someone said, it's not like it's going to be the best movie of the 2010s already. I bet you someone said that. Cool. So those are all the comments we got. And now, Richard, what have we got next? What's next on the agenda?
Continue the franchise. So this is a segment where we talk about continuations of the franchise, and then we'll bloody pitch our own, shall we?
Okay.
So a couple of interesting things. Mad Max Fury Road has a black and white version of it, which is called the Black and Chrome edition. And apparently George Miller says that's the definitive way to watch the film. So I watched Mad Max Fury Road very recently, and I said to you last week, I was like, I might watch, like, hunt down the black and chrome version and watch that instead, just to give me something fresh. So I downloaded it, and then I sort of scrolled through it to just be like, oh, what does it look like? And then I was like, why would anyone watch the film like this? And I just watched the normal version. Because it's such like, the colors and everything, it's so beautiful. But it is like a cool and interesting experiment. And apparently there's like a silent version of it as well, but I don't know if that ever actually got released, but he talked about it coming out. There's a 2015 video game, which is like an original story set in the world. I've heard mixed things about it, but I would still quite like to play it. There's been many a time when I've almost bought it.
I remember seeing that in stores and being like, what the heck is this?
They released some prequel comics for Fury Road. And then in terms of actual film sequels, they found during the writing process for Fury Road that they had enough story material for 2 additional scripts, one of which was called Mad Max Furiosa, which is a completed script apparently. And George Miller hoped to film it after the release of Fury Road. In March 2015, during an interview with Esquire magazine, Tom Hardy revealed he was attached to star in 3 more Mad Max films starring Fury Road. And George Miller announced he also wants to make a follow-up called The Wasteland, Mad Max The Wasteland, which he clarified was just a working title. And then there was reports that there weren't going to be any more, and then he said he still wants to make more. In July of this year, he said there are 2 stories, both involving Mad Max and also a Furiosa story. We're still solving. We've got to play out the Warner's thing. I think there's issues with the rights to this film.
Yeah, no, it's the same as, I think it's the same as John Carpenter with Halloween. Like they clearly didn't give George Miller enough money for what he did, and so it's like a situation like that, like a financial.
But because it was like to make Fury Road, he had to like reacquire the rights to the series.
Yeah.
But he said it seems to be pretty clear that it's going to happen. So we'll see.
Well, you're getting you're getting old, George. So get on it.
And
Don't leave us hanging.
Tom Hardy's getting old.
Is he?
I don't know. Well, I mean, yeah, time is linear, isn't it? So
time is linear. Linear D's nuts. They added D's. It doesn't make sense. You should have said linear nuts, linear balls. Even then, it does still make sense.
Okay, so what have you got?
Just trying to tie it back in. You feel me? Just trying to make the podcast feel like one cohesive package. All right.
What have you got?
Okay, so I've got a simple idea, and that is to continue the legacy of what the Mad Max sequels are. I say don't make Mad Max Furiosa or Mad Max The Wasteland. Just don't fucking make anything for another 15 years. Direct it when he's 100 and just make something that's hugely different and like unexpected and a sign of its times in the same way that Fury Road was. Because I would honestly feel a little bit it almost feels a little bit ill-fated to make a straight-up sequel to Fury Road with everything that with how well it was received and kind of its place in history. It feels like you're probably not going to make something. If you're going to make something that is a sequel and the most sequel-y of all Mad Max films, and it's just very similar to Mad Max Fury Road in a way that none of the sequels are similar to each other, I almost feel like you're destined to fail there. So I would say wait a while, make something tonally and aesthetically different that could be seen as a soft reboot, just to keep the tradition alive. You know, that seems to be the only good way to make a good Mad Max movie. Actually, that's not true. We just haven't seen the opposite done yet.
Yeah. It's interesting. How well do you reckon this film would have done if it was just called Fury Road?
I don't know. I was thinking about that while watching it. Like, can you cut the Mad Max mentions out of it at all? And it's more like gasoline is a returning element though. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like it probably wouldn't have done as well if it was Fury Road, if it was just called Fury Road. But it's still like a multi-million-dollar film that they would have tried to sell. So I think it would have still had some kind of staying power.
Yeah, it'd be interesting, like because the title kind of gets butts and seats and has that recognition. Yeah, but it'd be interesting, like if it was just like a very clearly a Mad Max film, but just called Fury Road.
Yeah.
But anyway, my continuing franchise. Well, see, I was thinking along similar lines as like don't do a direct sequel. I quite like the title Mad Max: The Wasteland or Mad Max Wasteland, but like I was going off the fact that like society's devolved more in each film, and I was like, how can you like what's the next step beyond Fury Road?
Yeah.
And I don't know, what is the next step beyond Fury Road?
Whatever. You're giving this to me. I would say, well, no, the hopeful next step would be that society rebuilds.
Oh, like right? Yeah, go back. So it's like a bell curve. So 4, 5, and 6 is about the rebuild of society.
I mean, why not?
Yeah.
Like, in terms of the world, I would be interested to see what other countries are up to or what at least other environments are like. But I guess the whole point is that it's all a big dust bowl.
Oh, well, yeah, or just George Miller make his next film, like another Lorenzo Zoil or Witches of Eastwick, and then cut to a character goes to Australia, and it's just Fury Road. No other society has like been affected.
I mean, yeah. If you've ever walked through the streets of like Sydney at night, it's not too dissimilar from the dystopia we see presented in Mad Max.
Yeah, so that's my idea. Is just George Miller makes another like drama, whatever, and then a character flies to Australia, and during the events of Fury Road.
Yeah. Could it also involve Babe and Happy Feet?
Oh, of course, yeah, the George Miller Cinematic Universe and his cancelled Justice League.
It just wraps an entirely other complete and full cinematic universe into this.
Yeah, so that's my extended franchise.
Nice. Well, Richard, I believe
one more
brings us to
segment
the end of the show.
And that is, it's called revealing the whatever the franchise that we're doing next is.
Yeah,
because
so this was voted on our Patreon. We for $1 a month at www.patreon.com/cultpopture, you can suggest and vote on every second franchise we cover, or at least one franchise a month. Sometimes for scheduling we have to make it so it's 2 in a row, but you get it once a month basically for just $1. Richard, you wouldn't, if I took $1 out of your bank account for the rest of your life, you would never notice.
Yeah.
So yeah, get on there and get involved. And this month we were like, we'd like to do something Christmassy. We kind of feel like we've covered most Christmas franchises. So as long as there is a single Christmas entry, a single movie in the franchise,
Christmas mention
that is a Christmas special or a Christmas movie or whatever, we'll consider it. So we got some cool suggestions, including what did we get? We got like A Christmas Story has 2 sequels that nobody knows about, so that would have been a cool option. Someone suggested The Muppets because there's a Muppets Christmas Carol, but the winning franchise, Richard, tell me what it is. Whisper it into my ear.
With it's a trilogy of 3 films, the Harold and Kumar trilogy.
Which, of course, the final film is...
A very Harold and Kumar Christmas in 3D. And the third dimension is marijuana, as Michael Baston, who suggested this. Said. I'm excited to cover
riffing off our Jaws 3D discussion.
I'm very excited for these films.
I've seen the first 2. They feel instrumental to my budding teenagehood, and yet almost entirely forgotten at the same time.
Yeah, it'll be good for the problematic comedy discussions.
Problematic sex comedy series that we have on this show. Richard, we haven't done a problematic sex comedy in what feels like ages.
Yeah.
It's been too long, buddy. I can't wait to jump back into the throes of walking on glass as we both genuinely try to be good people, but we'll probably say something wrong that I'll cut out in the edit.
All too familiar. So check back in 2 weeks' time for a very Harold and Kumar 3D Christmas, and also Guantanamo Bay and White Castle.
Latest. And next, well, not. Oh, he's gone. Next week we are doing the 2019 Netflix Christmas movies, which apparently is becoming a tradition that we're going to do each year. So we'll be reviewing them next week. But beyond that, guys, thank you so much for listening. Let us know in the comments what your favourite Mad Max film is, or what your favourite scene is, or what you agree or disagree with what we've said. We love hearing from you, and you can do that through finding us on Facebook and giving Cult Popture a like on Facebook, or on YouTube, or on Instagram, or on Acast or iTunes. Give us a 5-star review on iTunes. We'll read them out at some point. You can also find us on Discord now. I've also got a Movember campaign. I've also and all these fun places where you can communicate with us and tell us what you think of the show and what you think of us, and how much of do you want to be our friend?
Yeah, let us know.
I want to be your friend. Yeah. All right, everybody. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.
Or in 2 weeks if you only listen to Film Franchise Fortnights.